Hello and welcome to this episode of Five Alarm Task Force. If you're listening to the audio, welcome back. If you're watching the video on our YouTube channel, welcome aboard. We're happy to have you with us and happy to be with you. I'm Steve Green, your host. And today, my guest is Tonya Herbert of Responder Wipes. Tonya is the owner and president of Responder Wipes and Florida PPE Services. While working for an architectural firm that specialized in designing public safety facilities, she became passionate about improving the health and wellness of first responders, specifically firefighters. She worked with researchers and chief officers in the fire service to develop specific design strategies for mitigating exposure to carcinogens and other toxins. Twice yearly, she presented these strategies to fire chiefs across the country at a public safety facility planning seminar. With this knowledge, Tonya founded Responder Wipes, which provides on-scene decontamination supplies, including wipes, shampoo and body wash, and encapsulation bags. She has continued pursuing her passion for firefighter health and wellness by consulting with organizations such as Healthy Firefighters, the Skellefteå model, the Swedish collaborative project aimed at preventing occupational health hazards among firefighters. And by the way, folks, if you have not read the summary or read the information about the Skellefteå model from Sweden, you really need to if you're a firefighter. It's really important, and you'll be surprised just how broad and important what this initiative is doing. Now adopted at the standard in 17 European countries, Tonya works with a group to bring the Healthy Firefighters Project's concise decontamination protocols to U.S. firefighters. She has also presented to groups such as the National Association of State Fire Marshals with Julius Hallis, Director, Florida State Fire Marshal, on the topic of cancer in the fire service. One of Tonya's most passionate projects has been the creation of Carney Strong Initiative in honor of Battalion Chief Josh Carney, who passed away from occupational cancer. She co-founded this nonprofit organization to assist small, rural, and volunteer departments with developing a cancer prevention program through the donation of decontamination supplies and educational materials. You can find the Carney Strong Initiative at https://www.carneystrongs, that's C-A-R-N-E-Y, strong, two words together, .org. Most recently, Ms. Herbert has opened Florida PPE Services, an Intertech verified ISP, which cleans, inspects, and repairs firefighter turnout gear. She's extremely knowledgeable in setting up a decontamination space within a fire station, including selecting and programming extractors, dryers, and hydrostatic testers. She is a published author with her article, Making a Habit of Post-Fire Skin Decontamination. Sorry, something got in the way of my eye tooth and I couldn't see what I was saying. Appearing in Crackle Magazine online. We'll put that link to that Crackle Magazine on her bio on our guest page. Tonya, it's a pleasure to welcome you to the show.
Thank you so much, Steve, for having me. I really appreciate it.
You know, we got to meet through our mutual friend, Todd LeDuc.
Yes.
Todd and I have been friends for over 30 years, both from greater Boston area. And we often love to reminisce about the days up there. But of course, we're both down here in warmer South Florida. So I think we're both happier. But I really have been following, I've been following you on social media for quite a while because of the shared passion we both have, which is the Firefighter Cancer Initiative and all arms of it. Is this is like putting three octopi together. That gives us 24 arms. But that's what we need, because there are so many aspects of this initiative and why we're doing it, and the people that we know who not only are on this team, but they've gone through it themselves. And they're better now, and they're fighting with us, and we're fighting with them. And our fight is basically education. That's what we're all trying to do. So let's talk about how Responder Wipes came together. In about the last 5 to 8 years, there've been a flurry of companies creating decon things, and of course, some of them started out with just wet wipes, baby wipes, but what we're facing is much more complex than just getting dirt off of washing our hands and rubbing a little dirt off of our face.
Absolutely.
And that means that we need something that was created specifically to deal with what we know scientifically we're now facing at every single fire, whether it's a dumpster fire, a wastebasket fire, or a structure fire.
Right.
We're facing all these new carcinogens and other toxins that grew really exponentially in the last 20 years.
Yeah.
Once we started using butane as a base chemical for almost every plastic that's made today, with benzene products as well, we opened ourselves up to a plethora of carcinogens and poisons. Yet we really didn't know what we were doing when we just thought it was another fire.
Right.
So how did you look at the task at hand? How do I help firefighters right on the scene or right after they come back from the scene and develop responder wipes?
Well, it really started in 2014 when I was working with the architectural firm. We had clients that were coming to us asking us to design a station to control contaminants from being brought back into the living quarters. Specifically, Gainesville Fire Department, we were interviewing for their project, and they had members that had been diagnosed with cancer. So I got put in charge of researching what the issue was. And pretty quickly, I came across the Firefighter Cancer Support Network white paper that they had done in conjunction with NIOSH. And at the end of the paper is a list of 13 things that you can do to minimize your risk. And I had gotten to know a lot of fire chiefs in my time with the architectural firm. So as I was talking to them, I was passing out the white paper, hey, are you guys aware of, this epidemic, and are you doing anything about it? And here's this great resource. And one of the fire chiefs that I had gotten to know well, he had been the fire chief in Georgetown, Texas, when we had done a public safety facility for him. He had moved over to Grand Prairie Fire Department, and his first year there, they buried 2 firefighters from cancer. And so he really became passionate about it from a personal standpoint. We were sharing resources. We were talking about what was in the list of things that you could do. And I said, well, gosh, number 3 on the list is to use baby wipes or wet naps on scene. That seems like low-hanging fruit, really easy to do. Are you guys doing that? And he said, well, we tried, but my guys don't like baby wipes. They shred, they ball up, they tear if you've got a 5 o'clock shadow, and they really don't want to smell like a baby's bottom when they're done. So I said, well, there's got to be something else on the market. So I literally just started looking just to help him and his department out. And right at that time, there was a couple of products that had just come on the market. Action wipes was on the market. They had been used in sports arenas and hikers. I bought those and sent them to him, and rescue wipes had just come out also, and I sent those to him. He tried both of them, said, no, this is still not quite it. He said, we want something bigger. We don't want a little tiny baby wipe. So he said, we should make something. And I kind of laughed at him because I have a business degree and I'm not in the fire service. And he bugged me for about 18 months. And then one night I had a dream and I saw the word fire in real big red letters in my dream. And I turned away from it. And then I saw the word again. And a voice in my dream said, this is your essence. This is at your core. Why do you keep turning away from it? So I woke up and thought, okay, I guess I'm going to figure out how to make some wipes. So I had the privilege of having a family member. My sister-in-law, her dad is a virologist, and he owns several biomedical firms. He used to work for the National Institute of Health. So I approached Dr. Prince and said, here's our problem. Tell me how to solve it. And he's like, yep, I gotcha. So he made some suggestions on some formulations, and we found a manufacturer and worked with their chemist. And our first thought was to do something with activated charcoal because of its absorptive properties. So, but we found quickly that putting a black solution on a wipe and telling a firefighter to wipe black stuff off of them where they couldn't really see that they were getting it off didn't work psychologically. So we went back to the chemist and said, okay, what would work similar to activated charcoal? And micellar water's been around for about 70 years, and it actually encapsulates whatever, it breaks the bond between contaminants, dirt, oil, grease, whatever. It'll break the bonds between the skin and the contaminant, encapsulate it, and then trap it in the fabric of the wipe. So we thought, okay, yep, that's what we need. beta tested it on the department, looked at different sizes, and we found that if we did a large wipe the size of a hand towel, the firefighters were more likely to use the whole wipe and really wipe off well, rather than doing 2 or 3 small ones. Whether they didn't want to bother with it, they didn't want to open multiple packages or whatever, we just found that they did better with one large wipe. So in 2016, we launched Responder Wipes, and I did partner with the chief from Grand Prairie, Texas, Chief Robert Fite. He was my business partner for about 16 months, and then decided that managing a department of 250 firefighters kept him busy enough, and he really didn't have time to also be a business owner. So I took over the company at that point, still working for the architectural firm part-time, or working with them full-time, doing Responder Wipes part-time. I ended up leaving them, going to work for the National Association of State Fire Marshals, so I could be, directly in the fire service, learn more about the whole fire service, the cancer, what was going on, and it just kind of took off from there. Left in 2019 to go work for Responder Wipes full-time. And in 2020, I launched Florida PPE Services as a dovetail into Responder Wipes. Orlando Fire Department is one of my customers. Orlando's where I'm based. And with the 2020 edition of NFPA 1851, they realized that doing all their cleanings in-house was going to be a bit challenging because the requirements were increased. So one of the district chiefs said, "Hey, you don't know anybody that would want to open an ISP in Central Florida, do you?" And I thought, sure, why not? I don't have anything better to do. So, and it really goes along very closely with what I'm trying to do with Responder Wipes, which is really to give you a toolbox. And that's why you mentioned Todd LeDuc and why I like LifeScan Wellness. Right. Firefighter cancer, there is no one silver bullet to prevent occupational illnesses. It's going to take a toolbox of things, whether it is, minimizing sleep deprivation, whether it's having a healthy diet, whether it's getting annual screenings, doing preliminary exposure reduction on scene. There's just a whole host of things that need to come together. So by having Responder Wipes and Florida PPE Services, I really feel like I can offer my customers a more well-rounded approach to keep them healthy.
That's terrific. And I think you hit on something very, very important and very strong, which is the fact that we can have dozens of products available, but we have to convince the firefighters that they have to use it. And, it's easier in bigger departments, even in Florida, if you're a firefighter, couple of the departments you think of that come to mind right away is, Miami-Dade Fire Rescue, Fort Lauderdale, Orlando Fire, Reedy Creek, Reedy Creek Fire Department, right around the corner from where you are. Yeah. And I remember going to my very first visit with my wife to Disney right after it opened. My parents were living in Lake Worth at the time, and we drove up, and going to the driveway was in the middle of the in-road, and then the exit was the Reedy Creek Fire Station. And being a volunteer at that time, I told my wife, "Well, hold up, we'll go into the park in a minute. I got something more. This is my park. This is my amusement park here." So I walked in and talked for a few minutes with the firefighters there. But I think education and having interviewed Keith Tyson on the show and spoke and correspond with Mike Dubron out in LA, and knowing that actually when you mentioned Gainesville, the guy I met when I was inducted into voted into this volunteer fire department in North Carolina in '77, that guy who was 18 years old then is still my best friend today, and he's chief pilot for Alachua County. And so, when I hear anything to do with Gainesville, it's always him that comes to mind. And we were talking about, he came to visit 2 weeks ago, and we were talking about what we're facing, what we as firefighters today are facing, because he transitioned after 3.5 years in our department. He transitioned to police with Metro PD in Washington, D.C., which was where he grew up. And we've talked about this together frequently, because we talk about some of the calls that we've been on, and we keep thinking, geez, what about when we were in that tanker? You know, what, you know, and then of course we also had our chief at the time, as I mentioned this before, a wonderful chief, a great guy, really cared for his people, and a volunteer, a small, only 5 paid employees. The rest of us were all volunteers, but he was terrific. But he was also an expert at that time in flammable liquids fires. And he was very friendly with one of the large manufacturers, and we probably had 255 or 10-gallon pails of AFFF in our firehouse and in our storage container. Luckily, the only time I ever came in contact with it was on gear, and I was hosed down afterwards. This was back in the 70s and early 80s. So, but that was it. Never got on my hands or anything like that. But in those old days, yeah, my gear as a volunteer was probably in my trunk or in my back seat. And that was the car that when my first daughter was born, that she had a baby car seat in. And and then living when we moved up to Syracuse, and I'd keep my gear right by the steps. And then our second daughter was born, and I just kept it there so I could get in. I slept in long johns, especially during the winter, so I could get in my gear and run the car and get down to the firehouse. And then as I started learning more and more, a few years ago, I said, oh my God, did I expose my kids? Did I expose my wife, to this stuff? Now, again, the footnote is that in the 70s, from when I started, 77 to 85, we did not have a lot of the materials that's burning today, burning then. We had real wood furniture.
Right.
We had K-puck, not foam, filling furniture, couches. So that was just another wood, thank goodness. But we had flammable liquids fires, so we were exposed to the noxious fumes and the gases and the smoke and stuff like that. So we still wonder, were we exposed? Do we have that sort of Damocles hanging over our head? And even with this mystery malady I've been going through for a year now, that was one of my big fears was, am I suffering from a form of cancer caused by my time in the fire service?
Right.
And luckily, thank goodness so far, all the cancer markers are negative. So both the 2 doctors looking at that are pleased with the fact that everything was negative. But it's, unfortunately, as you and I both know, the 2 things firefighters dislike the most are status quo and change.
Absolutely.
Right? So the question is, how do we educate them? How do we educate our brothers and sisters that this is not, we're not asking you to spend more time doing little stuff. We're asking you to take 5 minutes to protect yourself and your family.
Right.
By using something to start doing gross decon before you leave the scene.
It's really going to be a bottom up and a top down approach to get, change to occur. The saying is, for me, what I try and tell people outside of the fire service when I talk to them about what I'm doing, change in the fire service is like turning a cruise ship in a pool. It's going to be very slow and deliberate. And it really, Sam Eaton, I heard one of the best examples. He said, when he started out in the fire service, paramedics didn't wear latex gloves. Now you wouldn't be caught dead without them.
I didn't.
Yeah, and it really took a generation to fully change where it's not even a thought anymore. It's just an automatic process now. And even how you doff the latex gloves. So I see that happening in the fire service with decontamination as well. And if you have not read the book Atomic Habits, I highly recommend it. It's a wonderful book by James Clear on either making a good habit, starting a good habit, or breaking a bad habit. And he really breaks down the science of why habits are formed, what causes them to stick, and how you can build habits or break habits. The first time I read the book, I realized that the meditation and journaling practice I had started, I had tried for probably 6 years to get a practice going and just couldn't do it. When it finally stuck, after reading the book, I realized I had implemented unknowingly the steps in the book. And I was like, okay, there's something to this methodology. So I read the book again to apply it to my business. And as I was reading it the second time, I thought, I think there's some applicable factors here for the fire service and getting them to change habits. So I read the book a third time, made a whole bunch of highlighted notes and little sticky notes, and then had an idea to write an article about how to change habits in the fire service around decontamination protocol. So I reached out to a couple of chiefs that I knew that had also read the book and asked what they thought, and they all thought it was a great idea. So I ended up writing an article, which you mentioned in my bio, was published in Crackle magazine. Great new magazine geared specifically to the individual firefighter, which is what my article was geared towards. If your department is not necessarily going to start a decontamination protocol, you as an individual can still take steps to protect yourself. And this article is all about how to build that habit for yourself. But what I also talk about in the article is one of the greatest influencers for change is going to be the company officer. Mm-hmm. Whoever's on that scene and directing the scene has more influence than anybody else. Even if a rookie who, we find that a lot of the younger generation now is very keen on protecting themselves. They want to grow up, stay in the fire service, retire, and have a long retirement. So they may be willing to do the decontamination protocol, but if they don't see their lieutenant or somebody else on the scene doing it, they're most likely not going to. So it was really important for me in the article to point out that the influence that the company officer has. So the article has been published. It's on Crackle magazine. I have some other things in the works with it, which I don't want to go into detail right now, but I think there's a lot of potential for it to be a roadmap for how individuals can really make a change with it. And, again, whether it's doing a decontamination protocol on scene, which, wipes are 5 minutes. It's going to take you less than 5 minutes. You come out into rehab or you're switching out your cylinder, you do a quick wipe down. It's really that easy. Before you eat any food, before you drink any water, and definitely before you get back in the engine to go back to the station. One of the critical aspects to changing a habit is a visual cue. So I designed some stickers that say, "Did you decon?" And I've got departments that have placed them on the engine doors or on the bay door before you go back in. I've got some arson investigators that have it on their laptop now. So when they go to get back in their car, and it's really just, a quick visual reminder, oh gosh, wait, hold on, I gotta, take a step back. And, a lot of this, you mentioned Carney Strong Initiative. This is all because of what I've seen personally. And I do not have a member in the fire service in my family, nor am I from the fire service. I was married to a military officer, and my stepfather was a police officer here in Central Florida. So I think the brotherhood, the camaraderie is very similar. But I just could not, when I started learning about how significant the cancer epidemic was, I could not sit back and just not do anything. It just kept really bothering me. And in 2018, I got a large online order for wipes, and it was significant. And I noticed that the email address was from a civilian. And I was like, okay, this is a little different, but okay. So I emailed the person, "Thank you so much for your order. I have lots of educational materials. If you're putting together a decontamination protocol for your department, I'd be happy to help you out." And she emailed me back and said, "Well, no, I'm not in the fire service. I did a fundraiser and I'm donating these wipes to my hometown department in honor of my cousin who died from occupational cancer." And of course I was just like, oh, I hate when I hear these things. Yeah. And so I said, "I'm so sorry." I refunded part of her purchase price. And I said, "Please, go do some other things with this, but tell me more about who your family member is." And it turned out that it was Battalion Chief Josh Carney, who I knew his story. We had a mutual friend, Aaron Heller. And so I was just really surprised that that's who it was for. Sat on it for a couple of days, and it just kept waking me up at night. There's more I can do. There's more I can do. And so about 3 days later, I sent Christine an email and said, "I love what you've done. I would like to do more. I am willing to donate a case of wipes a month through the end of the year in honor of Josh. Please let me know if that's something you'd be interested in." And of course, Christine jumped on board immediately, but said, "I really need to clear this with Lillian, Josh's widow." So for those who haven't heard the story of Josh Carney, he was a battalion chief at Midway Fire Rescue in Pawleys Island, South Carolina. He was diagnosed with stage 4 melanoma in June of 2017. Lillian and Josh had noticed some spots on his head, thought they were ingrown hairs, really kind of ignored them. And I think it was about 6 months before they actually, Lillian bugged him enough to go into the doctor. So he was 41 years old when he was diagnosed in June of 2017, and he passed away 4 months later. 4 months. It was such a dramatic turn of events in their lives. They had a daughter, Shayla, or they have a daughter who was in high school at the time. And unfortunately, at that time, South Carolina had no presumptive legislation. So Josh's death was not considered a line of duty death. He was able to retire shortly before he passed away. So Lillian does have some benefits through his pension, but nothing compared to what she should have gotten through a line of duty death. So Lillian was on board immediately. I think she was still processing her grief somewhat at this point, because it was really only about 4 or 5 months after Josh's passing. A couple months later, Lillian became involved with it, and we started a nonprofit, a 501c3. And I think we've made 42 monthly donations now. We have other partners with us. It's not just wipes, but it's gear cleaner, it's soap, it's a bunch of stuff. But Lillian and Christine and I were all very adamant that we wanted this to be about education as well. Firefighter Cancer Support Network, especially back in 17-18, was great on supporting a firefighter once they were diagnosed. But we really felt like there was a gap, especially towards the small rural and volunteer departments. And we wanted to make sure, because Lillian said, had I known Josh was at a higher risk, as his wife, I would have made him go to the doctor immediately. She said, but I didn't know, and neither did Josh, and it was the old, salty look. And she was adamant at that point, I will not let any other family go through what we've been through.
We, in our family, we've gone through a melanoma situation. Luckily, one of our daughters was here, and she and my wife had gone to the beach, and they came back, and I was out, and I came back to the house, and my daughter said, you need to look at something on mom's back. I said, what's the matter? She got hurt at the beach. She goes, no, but there's something there. I said, okay, I'll go look. And I'm the one with the paramedical background and stuff like that. And so I looked, and she goes, what do you think it is? I said, it's a trip to the dermatologist is what it is. She goes, well, I'll have to find it. I said, no, you're going to go to the phone now, and you're going to call the dermatologist's office, and you're going to make an appointment. And it was good that she did. It was stage 2. And it did require surgery, more than we had anticipated, but that was 11 years ago, thank God.
Wow.
And she's been fine since. We're both very adamant about going to the dermatologist. We basically go every quarter, just to keep it safe. I see these commercials and bugs me, but I'm now putting retinol on my dome, my chrome dome here, as my dermatologist has requested. And it was a lesson for both of us, because now I wondered, okay, did I do that?
Right.
Now this happened in 2010, but as soon as I learned from Bill about cancer,
because
and
Bill
then
had
from
melanoma too.
Right, then from Cindy, and then from Keith, and I started learning more and more. I'm saying, I wonder if it, at that point, did it have anything to do with me?
Right.
But at that point, I didn't even know about we didn't know about the PPE yet. That was thanks to Diane and Paul. So, I'm just wondering, we knew that there was poisons. So I'm wondering, did I cause this? And I even asked the doctor when we went for the surgeon. He says, now you've been living in Florida since 1985. He says, it's probably nothing to do with your fire service or your gear. It's probably just something that happens often in the state of Florida and in California and South Texas and those places. He goes, but you caught it in time. And that's the most important thing. And she didn't need any other medication, no other treatments or anything like that. So we're very lucky, but we know what it is. And we've cautioned friends. It's like what you said, once it happens to you or you know somebody, you start reacting to it, and we've both been educators for our entire lives. So for us, the way we react to it is after she was fine, she had just gotten a job as a director of education at a synagogue here in town when the diagnosis came up. And we started doing, okay, you know what, we're going to turn this into an educational project.
Yeah.
We're going to teach the kids. Even in a synagogue school, we taught the kids about, be careful with sun, always wear sunscreen in Florida, everything like that. Because she says, because I know what it happens when you don't.
Yeah.
And,
and when you know better, you do better.
Exactly. And then it becomes that habit that you were talking about, a good positive habit. Yeah. And that's why when I started learning from my guests and the people I would put in contact with, as a firefighter, I knew the only thing I had was this podcast to try to educate. And so I've worked hard to bring on guests on all manners of topics, but the dedication of this podcast, the mission statement has always been firefighter health, wellness, fitness for duty, and the cancer and behavioral health initiatives. That's what our mission is. And so I look to bring on guests who can talk to these issues and not only entertain our listeners and our viewers, but educate them as well. With listeners in nearly 40 countries, we've gotten great comments back about certain guests and topics and stuff like that. And to me, that's, even if I get three emails that said, hey, that podcast on the smoke and the stuff in smoke was terrific, thanks very much, we didn't talk about that in my department. Yeah, that's it. I knew that all the work it takes to put the podcast together, the video, is all worth it because somebody learned. One person said, I learned from that, and changing their lifestyle in the fire service.
Well, and that's really what I'm about too. I mean, especially because I'm not from the fire service, I felt like I really needed to educate myself on what the issue was. And so I started reaching out to a lot of the researchers that are already in the field. It kind of started with Jen Kerr. She's now Jen Brouillet. She's with the University of Ottawa. And at the time she was doing her master's at University of Ottawa, and her thesis was on firefighter cancer and looking at the urinary biomarkers. So she had reached out to several of the wipe companies on Twitter and said, so how do you know your wipes are really, removing and not maybe pushing it into the skin more or causing, because a lot of times when you think you're solving one problem, you're really causing another problem.
Right.
And so she reached out to several of us, and I think a few of the companies ignored her. A few said some things that were not very nice to her. And I said, you're right. You know what? I don't know. And I want to figure this out. So work with me. Tell me what I don't know and help me figure out whether, I'm on the right track. So Jen and I have really stayed in touch. And anytime she takes another part of her research to the next level, she's now working on her doctorate. And she's had several papers published now. So then that kind of turned into reaching out to Dr. Sarah Jenke, right, and Dr. Gavin Horn, talking about, what were the testing with wipes? Is there any standard for wipes? And I found out pretty quickly there was no standard, and there was no, good testing out there. So I reached out to North Carolina State University, Dr. Brian Orman with the textiles division. Dr. Orman and his team have done a lot of work on particulate blocking hoods, developing new materials. And so I said, hey, can you test my wipes? I want to know if they're effective or not. And he said, sure. So we started almost 2 years ago trying to put together a protocol for it. There was no protocol for testing, no testing standards, no, this is how you do it. So every step of the way, it's been, okay, well, what's a good surrogate to use? Because you can't just dump PAHs or lead on a live human subject. There's review boards that prevent that sort of thing.
Right.
So it was, okay, well, what's a good skin surrogate? Do we use pig skin? Do we use fake skin? Do we use skin that's been salvaged from, autopsies? That was the first part of it. Then it was, okay, how do we contaminate it evenly? How do we wipe evenly? So anyway, Dr. Orman's been working through that process for several years now. I'm happy to say that we've had some preliminary results, and they are very promising. It was very effective. He's now working on a research grant for arson investigators, and he's continuing the efficacy study with that. So I'm anxious for him to get the results of that. But in the meantime, I've gotten to know all of these researchers very well, and I consider several of them friends now. And anytime I'm not really sure when a new study comes out, I'll send it to Sarah and Jen. Okay, translate this, research for dummies, please. And, they can usually give me a good indication on whether it's a good study. A lot of things that are published out there haven't been peer reviewed, and people are eating them up like, it's candy, and really it may not be all that it appears to be. So it's very important for me to make sure that whatever research I'm passing along to my customers is good research, and that I understand what it's talking about. So that whole group has been very good to me, and I really appreciate all that they've done. And one of the things that we're starting to see now too is that firefighting is not just leading to cancer, but there's also some research that suggests that Parkinson's disease may have a link to it. And I would not be surprised if we see a link between that type of disease or other autoimmune diseases with cancer. With firefighting. There's just so many things that go into it, and it's a synergistic effect when you are exposed to something where two people may respond to the exact same incident. One gets cancer and one doesn't. And a lot of it may have to do with the genes, their gene makeup or other environmental factors. And because there's just so much in that cocktail, in that mix, that it's just really important for me to continue to take a look at all the various aspects of what leads to an occupational exposure and how to reduce it. And you mentioned the Swedish folks, Healthy Firefighters. See, they're light years ahead of the United States on decontamination protocol. They've been doing this for 12, 15 years. It started with Stefan Magnusson. He watched one of his friends very quickly deteriorate and die from cancer. And he had already seen some of it and quickly figured out that there was a causation. He approached the researchers, the state government, the unions. They all worked together to develop the Healthy Firefighters protocol. They basically treat soot like it's a bloodborne pathogen. They don't ever touch it. As soon as an incident is over, they're bagging their gear on scene. They're changing clothes on scene. All of the contaminated gear goes back and is immediately washed. Tools, equipment, hose, everything. Everything is washed and cleaned. They have second sets of gear, and it's all set to go before they get the next alarm. So they came and spoke at the Health and Safety Collaborative Conference in Florida back in 2017, so about 4 years ago. I specifically went to that conference because I wanted to hear them speak and I wanted to meet them. And I had the pleasure of meeting them, and I just really felt like I understand that, we have thousands of departments across the United States, and one protocol is not going to fit every single department. But I certainly believe that there's parts of it that departments can adopt, whether it's the bagging the gear or, second sets of gear or treating it, washing it immediately. I just think it's an excellent protocol. So I've worked really hard to help them translate their presentations and their papers and work with them to get them published and speaking opportunities here in the US. And so it's just a great group there. If you have not seen the videos, highly, highly recommend them.
Right. All right. So what we'll do, we're going to take a break here, folks. If you're watching the video, you're not going to see anything different when we come back because nothing happens in the video. If you're listening to the audio, you know what's going to happen. We're going to take a little bit of a pause. You'll hear a few great messages, and then we'll be back with our guest, Tonya Herbert from Responder Wipes, right after this. Please stay tuned. Hello, and welcome back to this episode of Five Alarm Task Force. I'm your host, Steve Green. And with me today is my guest, Tonya Herbert, the founder of Responder Wipes. And we're talking about the good things about the Cancer Initiative. And we're talking about some of the challenges that the Cancer Initiative faces. And the biggest challenge, we were talking off air a moment ago, is that you have people who are brothers and sisters who are dedicated firefighters, but believe that cancer is just another risk of firefighting. Now, we all know that there are certain circumstances that occur. We're on a call, we're trained, we know what to do, but life throws us a curveball and something happens. We can't avoid all risks as firefighters, no matter how dedicated we are, no matter how many overtime shifts we work, no matter how many volunteer hours we put in. There are certain things that happen. On the other hand, we know well enough that if there's a structure fire and they want us to put water on it, we don't go there wearing our civilian clothes, a t-shirt and shorts, to put out a fire and go into the building. Because, yeah, firefighting is a risk, but you wear your gear to protect you from part of that risk. So we have to start educating firefighters from career, from volunteer, part pay, and even WUI, wildland urban interface firefighters, how important it is to understand that while cancer may be a risk to us in the job we do today, that doesn't mean we simply accept it and the consequences. Because unlike the unknown that can happen on a fire scene, when we respond to a fire call, we know some of the risks and we can try to mitigate them ahead of time. I mean, we can only do that if they accept the education part, right?
Absolutely. And, you touched on it earlier. The environment that you all are fighting fires in now is very different from what it was 20 years ago. The legacy materials of, 25, 30 years ago didn't release the VOCs and the other toxic compounds that today's built environment does. Car fires now, with all of the metals and synthetics, are one of the most poisonous environments you can be in. And how often do you see a firefighter maybe not even on their breathing apparatus when they're responding to a car fire? And it is going to be a change, but it has to occur. When 30 years ago, when SCBA use was very minimal, what would they do? They'd hold their breath, pull their shirt up and run in and, see how long they could stay in. That's a risk. You take steps to minimize it. We know dermal absorption is a route of exposure, and now it's time to take steps to minimize it. And a lot of people have asked, well, how do you know whether it's coming from inhalation or dermal absorption? The studies, there's been at least 3 studies now that suggest that dermal absorption is a greater route of exposure than inhalation. And that may be because people are being better about wearing their SCBA. But, people say, oh, well, we're in turnout gear. How's it getting on our skin? The pressure of the environment causes the smoke and the particulates to billow up under your protective ensemble. There was some great research by Jeff Stahl and RTI where they showed using the glow in the dark. They used I can't remember exactly what it's called, but to simulate where the particles are landing on the firefighter under their turnout gear. And I think people were really surprised at how much of it was being deposited on the skin, especially when you start looking at the neck and the groin areas and the underarms where the skin is very thin. And with every degree of increase in temperature, your skin is becoming more absorptive. And your skin is your largest organ. So when you're inside fighting a fire, you're coming out like a giant human sponge. And you're just absorbing everything that was in that environment. So I guess I get a little frustrated because I don't understand, if you know that there's an exposure and you have a really easy way to minimize that exposure, why aren't you doing something to reduce the risk?
Exactly. Right now we're all screaming about PPE and the PFAS and PFOA in our bunker gear and the legacy of that. I mean, that goes back to 40 years when I started. And so we're all looking for better PPE and yes, we need second sets cetera, and hopefully with good people like Rob Bilott fighting the great fight for us against the manufacturers who knew that these chemicals were carcinogenic from the get-go, and just it's a cost of doing business. If somebody dies from it, just that's it, just cost of doing business. But so if we're getting your attention regarding the PPE that you wear, you used to look at, if you were growing up and wanting to be a firefighter, you saw pictures of firefighters from my day and time come out of a building, and yeah, they had worn their mask, but there was soot all over their face, outside the mask, and up in their wrists and stuff like that. Oh, that looks cool. And we used to like our helmets being dirty and our gear being dirty. But the fact is that now we know, I mean, if you saw that and you thought it looked cool, maybe it looked cool, but the fact was, all those pores, as you mentioned, with every degree increase of heat, especially in a moist heat element, the pores open up. That's what you call sweat. But what you don't realize is those pores work in two ways. They let the liquid out of the sweat, but that doesn't close them. That just means they're still open, waiting for the next amount of liquid that has to go out. So while those pores are open, whether it's your forehead, around your ears, around your wrists, around your neck, as you mentioned, that once that smoke and that toxic, the smoke in some of it which sticks to us, the carbon that sticks to us, is problematic. But you're not helping yourself by not doing anything about it. You just chalk it up to being, oh, I'm a firefighter, I'm dirty. You're dirty, but you wipe that across with your finger. Now it's on your finger, and you just pushed it deeper into your skin.
Well, and how many firefighters actually like that smoky smell? I'll talk to guys and they'll say, oh yeah, 2 days later and I was still sweating it out. Or I took a shower and came home and my wife said, oh, you must have had a good one tonight.
Yep.
If you smell it, there is still contamination. And so that was when I mentioned that we tried to use activated charcoal in our wipes, that it didn't really work so well.
Right.
I kind of tucked it in my back pocket because I knew it really had a place. And so about a year ago, we launched Responder Wash, which is an activated charcoal shampoo and body wash. And it does a great job of removing that smoke smell from your hair and skin, because activated charcoal is adsorbative. It will pull things out, and it's like a sponge, and it's absorbing all of that stuff. So it's pulling that stuff out of your skin and your hair so that you're not taking it back home with you. Because there's a great video out of the University of Miami, the bunker transfer video, where again, they're using that glow in the dark, powder, and showing how the contaminants transfer from the scene to the firehouse, to your personal vehicle, to your children. And you may be okay with the risk of being a firefighter, but does that mean your family has to also be okay with the risk of you exposing them to these contaminants? And especially in volunteer or even, a paid on-call department.
Right.
A lot of times you're carrying your gear in your personal vehicle. If you can smell it in your car, it's off-gassing in your car, and it's exposing your family to those toxins as well. How many people take their station wear back home and wash it in their personal washing machine with their family's clothes? Probably back, Steve, when you were a volunteer, you may have even thrown your turnout gear in your washing machine at home and washed it. I can promise you people...
Never washed it unless
okay, if you washed it.
Unless it was a hose down on scene for something. But no, in the 8 years, I never washed the gear at all.
I've actually talked to people who wash their turnout gear in their personal washing machine at home. You are cross-contaminating everything. And, you and I were talking about your wife's melanoma diagnosis and the questioning whether it had something to do with your career. I know several firefighters whose significant others have come down with cancer, and that is a guilt that they have. Did I cause this? Did I bring something home? And so I really want to emphasize to people, especially, I talk to firefighters who are, 20 years on the job. Oh, if I'm going to get cancer, I'm going to get cancer. It's too late for me now. A, no, it's not. And B, you are setting an example for all of the other firefighters that are coming in under you. They're looking up to you. So you need to model the behavior of what they should be doing. You know better, you do better.
Right. And again, we go back to where we exactly started, is the two things that firefighters dislike most are status quo and change.
Right.
Yet we'll invest our own personal money for a new piece of equipment, a new escape rope, for example. That's important to us, to escape out of a bad situation. We'll take money out of our own pocket to buy that. We'll buy our own tools. Some of us will go out and buy a Halligan bar or an Esta bar and have that because that's my personal tool that I want to have when I'm responding. And that's great. I think that's terrific. But if you're going to take money out of your pocket, why don't you spend it on something that's going to keep you healthy and protect you from a risk that is absolutely well known now and clear in the fire service, which is the toxins and the carcinogens at every single fire that we fight today, whether it's like I said, I'll repeat it from the first segment, whether it was a little wastebasket, it was a dumpster. One of my guests used to be lieutenant or captain in outside of Providence, Rhode Island, and they went on a dumpster call and got it out. Just to them it was a routine dumpster fire. And before they even got back to the station, one of the officers collapsed and was rushed to the hospital. So the guy, my guest, went to the hospital to check on his friend, and they said, "Oh, he had a heart attack." He says, "From what?" This guy was trim, ate properly, exercised regularly, and he says it doesn't make sense. He said, "Well, what else could it be?" And he says, "I don't know, but I don't think it's a heart attack. We got to find something else. Did you do blood gases or anything like that?" He says, "Well, no." He says, "Well, why don't we try that? Hydrogen cyanide." Mm-hmm. And so from that point on, it was the earliest detector that was out there, was not being well used in the fire department yet, but they got them and started using them because my guest was in the same situation at another fire. His went off in time for him to get out of the area and be okay. But that's the difference. We learn from when something happens, we have to learn from it. And on this show that we have always stressed, a great firefighter is one who is always willing to learn and always willing to share what they've learned.
Absolutely. You mentioned the different environments, and you said earlier about WUI, and with the wildland firefighters now having so many of the fires burning into towns and proximity to structures, it is becoming a true interface. And with the different compounds in these structures now, and the wildland firefighters not having the protective equipment that a structural firefighter has, I think we're going to start to see significant increases in cancer rates in the wildland firefighters. First of all, it's not been studied very significantly, and there's some new studies out there, but also because of the change in exposures. And so I think it's really important to start looking at, I know they're starting to look at PPE, from the clothing for wildland firefighters to, half of them have bandanas on and that's their right. respirator. I think there's really a lot of areas that need to be considered when you're looking at wildland firefighters. And one of the things, we did design our wipes so that they would be biodegradable, because when I did talk to wildland firefighters, that was one of the things that they were saying is they have to minimize, whatever they carry in their pack. They have to minimize their impact. And if you've not had a chance to learn about Jason Ramos, Jason is a smoke jumper out of Washington State. And he's actually written a book called Smoke Jumper. But Jason started looking at gear that was out there for firefighters making claims of, what they could do. One of the first things he looked at was the wildland structures, so if they get caught in a burnover. And they had, we had the Granite Mountain hotshots, the failure of those structures. Sure. when they burned over. So Jason started a company, Product Research Gear, to evaluate different products that are on the market. And he's actually been looking, Jason's program is kind of interesting. you can't pay him for an evaluation. Everything that he does, he does basically a year-long evaluation of products. The first is it's a three-phase thing. He'll first look at your company, look at your product, decide if he's interested. If he's interested, he'll do a small field test on it. Then if it passes that, then he does a large field test on it. Jason had actually been looking for wipes for almost 10 years and had tested several products on the market and never found anything that he felt he could recommend. And he came across our wipes almost 2 years ago and asked me if he could evaluate them and test them. And so we made it through each of the phases. And last February, after a year, he said, okay, I'm ready to recommend these. These are the best wipes I've ever used. And he's used a lot. He said, there's nothing out there that cleans like they do. The fact that they're biodegradable and, they're even safe for Motorola radios. Motorola tested them because people were taking the wipes, those who were using wipes would take them and then wipe down their radio also. And some of the wipes were degrading the radios. And so Motorola tested several brands and responder wipes were safe for the radios. So Jason, we were fortunate enough that Product Research Gear gave us their stamp of approval. But Jason's protocol and the gear that he looks at is really remarkable. And Jason's story is really remarkable too, so if you ever have a chance. But his goal is to really start to change the way wildland firefighters are looking at decontamination as well. And, and it's just, again, it's a very complex, big problem, and there's a bunch of different ways to come at it and solve it, and there's different wipes on the market. And you don't use responder wipes, great, use something.
Exactly.
My business philosophy is there's enough business for all of us, and I just want you to use something, even if it's not. If we got to the point where there wasn't firefighter cancer and there wasn't a need for wipes anymore, I'd say, hallelujah, thank you, time for me to retire. So, this is really, and you talked about educating. This is really, for me, about educating the firefighters on what they can do. And again, with Carney Strong, that has been our mission. Every time we send out a donation, they get a stack of educational materials that go with it. And we chose to focus on small rural and volunteer departments because a lot of them don't have the resources. They're not going to conferences. They are holding pancake breakfast to put fuel in the engines. So they're certainly not buying decontamination supplies. Chances are they don't have medical coverage, so they're not getting annual physicals. So we really wanted to focus on where we felt like there was a gap. And again, like I said, Lillian felt like had she been educated, she would have done something differently. She's now taken her story. I mentioned that South Carolina did not have presumptive legislation when Josh passed away. I'm happy to say that they do have some now. And part of that came about with Lillian teaming up with the South Carolina Firefighters Association to testify before the South Carolina legislature about hers and Josh's story. And I think that Carney Strong Initiative kind of gave Lillian something to take out of Josh's passing and turn it into something good. She certainly does not wish that story on anybody else, but if she can have something good come from it, then she will definitely continue to tell her story.
Right.
So.
And I want to remind our viewers and listeners that if you're on Instagram, you can find Carney Strong at Carney Strong. Their posts are all their posts are directed to help anybody who's reading it. Every post is about educating, teaching, sharing this situation that Lillian found herself in, that other wives and husbands have found themselves in for their spouses who were firefighters and went through this terrible scourge on this career and this job that we love to do. And we've said this before also, we're a special breed. Not everybody is ready to walk into a flaming structure, even with protective gear and a hose in hand. And people, there are a lot of people who want to help other people, and that's wonderful. And most of us find ways to do that becomes a passion for us. But firefighters, we're just a little bit of a different ilk because we'll go that extra mile to help somebody that we don't even know. We talk about Mrs. Smith and our late great chief and mentor, Alan Brunacini, who taught us that our job is to take care of Mrs. Smith on her worst day, even if their worst day is her cat up a tree.
Yeah.
And yet, while we're willing to help Mrs. Smith, who we don't even know, we're hesitant and reluctant to take care of ourselves. And we have to cross that barrier. That's one of the elephants in the firehouse from my class, is that when ego gets in the way of your passion. It's great to be a passionate firefighter. That's important, to love the job and work at the job as hard as you can. But to do so and to take care of others, you have to take care of yourself first. Because if
Absolutely.
you don't take care of yourself, you're not going to be able to help anybody else.
Well, and Lillian has been very forthcoming with her story because she wants people to see what it's like to be a widow and for Shayla to grow up without her father. Her father will not be there. He was not there to see her graduate from high school. He will not be there when she gets married. And Lillian, a lot of her posts will be, I miss him calling me to tell me that he forgot his wallet at home and can I bring it up to the firehouse? I miss him asking me for an apple pie. It's the little things that you will miss.
Right.
And that's what she wants people to understand. When you are not decontaminating, you may just be thinking about yourself, but you've got to think about your family and you've got to think about everybody else that your decisions impact. And departments need to do that as well.
Right.
Not only is there a moral obligation to protect their firefighters, but there's a financial obligation. NIOSH, the RAND Corporation, did a study for NIOSH, and they looked at if they were able to reduce firefighter morbidity or mortality from cancer, there was a $71 million savings per year.
Wow.
Year. With all of these states that now have presumptive coverage, I think departments are going to really be forced to look at this and look at how they can prevent firefighter occupational illnesses, because they're going to have an increase in workers' compensation claims and line of duty death benefits that they're paying. So it is twofold. It is a moral obligation, but it will be a financial obligation. And think of your family. When you die, what kind of position are you putting them in? Because you didn't clean your gear or wipe off on scene or get your annual physical. You have a choice. You can do something. Even if your department doesn't, you can still do something personally.
Right.
And I think that's where I get a little frustrated. All the science in the world has directed us to what we need to be doing. Now do it. Just go do it. So
I've posted, I enjoy NASCAR. I'm not a crazy NASCAR freak, but I enjoy watching the races. And the only thing that bothers me, and I posted this on Twitter multiple times, is when I see the emergency teams going where there's a car fire and they're not wearing breathing apparatus.
Yeah.
And I can't understand, well, wait a second. You have a car that's using a very high octane fuel that we don't use in our cars. Although these are supposedly stock cars, you can't drive one of these basically on the streets to go to the market and pick up some veggies. But the cars are made of composites now today. That's burning. The oil's burning. The gasoline is burning. And you rush in with 2 fire extinguishers and a helmet and a padded suit. Okay. Yeah. Where are you taking care of yourself? And yes, you're going to rescue the driver and that will put out the fire in the car, make sure the driver's safe. Absolutely. No different from the rest of us. But if you don't have that gear on, that breathing apparatus on, or something, some sort of respirator on, when you get in there and you start hitting it with the Ansel, whatever, you're going to start taking that stuff in.
Yeah.
It's going to be still touching your face because you're not wearing a mask. If you're not wearing gloves, it's going to get on your hands. Do you go back and decon? I don't know, because we've never seen after a car fire at a race what happens to the rescue team when they go back to their station after the fire's out. But the fact is that any we got to, well, as we said, you mentioned that our WUI firefighter brothers and sisters are now starting to wear respirators, at least minimally. And you notice, by the way, when they do all the news reports from all three major networks, broadcast networks, then you add in the cable and satellite networks, most of their reporters, when they're reporting on scene from California for these fires the last 2 years, most of them are wearing a respirator, or they take it off just before they're on mic, and then they put it right back on. Okay, and that's it. Back to you, Jim. And they put it back on. At least they're wearing something, starting to, and that's probably going to evolve as well, because now that we know, as you mentioned, what they're being exposed to with these fires, because they're not just wood fires in the trees anymore. Right. Unfortunately, a lot of these trees are dead from beetle bark disease, or bark beetle, disease. And now it's going to the structures, the vehicles, other structures they have. You don't even know what's in some of these outside sheds or something like that, and what those are off-gassing, what they're putting out. So our WUI brothers and sisters should start looking at some way of doing some sort of a breathing safety situation for themselves.
I'll tell you how seriously we take it. So having an ISP now where we bring in department's gear for cleaning, inspection, and repairs, when any gear comes in, our personnel are in Tyvek suits, gloves, and they're wearing a respirator hood. I will not expose my personnel to that gear, right, because we know it's contaminated. And even clean gear, even when departments say, oh yeah, my gear is already clean, we still do the same thing. And a lot of that has to do with the PFAS that you were talking about earlier. Right. I'm very anxious as Dr. Peasley continues his research. I actually, Diane Cotter and I have spoken a few times, and Diane's just magnificent.
She's
when
wonderful.
When I explain to people outside of the fire service who Diane is, I say she's the Aaron Brockovich of the fire service.
She and Paul have been my mentors in this once I got connected to them.
So about 6-8 weeks ago, I mentioned to you off camera that I am a former military spouse. My ex-husband was Air Force Special Operations. He was an aviator, wore flight suits for a better part of 25 years, and he was recently diagnosed with prostate cancer. Diane and I were talking one day, and all of a sudden it hit me. I said, Diane, do you know if Dr. Peasley has ever tested military uniforms for PFAS? And she said, I don't know. I think maybe he's tested some fatigues, but, let me put you in. And she asked me why. And so I told her, I said, well, my ex-husband wore a flight suit. They are designed to be water resistant and fire retardant, just like turnout gear. I would be very curious to see if they have PFAS in them, because he was diagnosed with prostate cancer. And the Air Force has seen an increase in prostate and testicular cancer in their pilots.
Wow.
And they're studying it now. They have a whole host of things that they think it may be related to, and not one of them included their flight suits, which when the firefighters are wearing their turnout gear and the PFAS is on the outer shell, they've got a thermal liner and a moisture barrier between them and the outer shell. When the guys are wearing their flight suits, it's nothing but a t-shirt and underwear under that flight suit. So anyway, Diane put me in touch with Dr. Peasley. He has not tested flight suits. He did test fatigues, I believe, but I don't know that they were designed, flight suits are designed so that if they end up in a fire in the, aircraft. So anyway, I was able to get a couple of flight suits for him, and I sent them to him.
Great.
And so I'm waiting to see what kind of testing comes out of that. But, the PFAS in the gear, it's definitely an issue. And I know that the PPE manufacturers are working towards getting PFAS out of the gear, but there's always a trade-off. The components that are in PFAS are designed to make the gear water resistant, not just water resistant, but also resistant to oil and gasoline. And so far, there's not a lot of comparable substitutes. So when you trade one thing, what do you end up with that could be worse? And so I was at Fiero PPE Symposium last week, and it was really interesting to hear the research that's coming out on PFAS, because the 9,000 compounds plus make up, the PFAS umbrella. So there's a lot that we don't know.
Right.
But how do we fix it without creating a bigger problem?
Well, it's like with Teflon. The same companies that created Teflon, and Teflon was loaded with PFAS. Yeah. And yet we use it because, it's so convenient. It doesn't stick to the pan anymore. I can make the eggs and scrambled eggs, and I can just slide them right out. Well, Yeah, but that whole time, if you weren't, especially if you weren't using a hood or you didn't have a hood or exhaust fan on top of the stove, you were breathing all that in.
Mhm.
And so there's no doubt about the fact that, you know, PFAS, as Attorney Ballard has said, is throughout our ecosystem, not just in this country, but around the world. They found it in fish. They found it in ocean water. You know, and we're not taking care of our world. We're putting thousands of tons of plastic into our oceans every year. And yet we don't realize what we're doing to ourselves. This is, in a way, it's committing a slow suicide. Because we're poisoning everything around us. And then we complain, well, how come? Well, because you wanted to make your scrambled eggs.
Convenience, yes.
Yeah.
You know, that popcorn that you're popping in the microwave bag, that whole bag is coated inside of that bag. I
gave up those bags. And matter of fact, just a month ago, my wife came home with a little 3-pack from one of the stores. And I said, sorry, honey, you can't have it. She goes, why? I said, I have a fresh popper. I said, all I put on is a Truvia and a little cinnamon, and it can pop in the microwave. Okay. And the plastic is BPA free because when we bought it, I looked at the carton to make sure it was BPA free. And I said, I'll make you popcorn anytime, any night you want it, but I just don't want you to make it in the bags anymore. We used to eat popcorn almost every night. Microwave bag popcorn. Once I learned about PFAS and PFOA in the liner, that was it. That was the end. You know, you have to take a stand. You have to draw that line in the sand and say, I got to take care of myself. And whether it's, you know, 2 old folks like my wife and myself, or you're a young middle-aged firefighter, you got 10 years on, 20 years on, or you're a new newbie, you're a new rookie out there. If you are a rookie or you're in the academy and you're still looking, remember, your health is what's going to determine what kind of a firefighter you're going to be.
Absolutely. So I don't know if Keith, you mentioned that you've had Keith Tyson on before. I don't know if he shared the statistic with you, but I heard Keith say one time that 25% of retirees are dying within the first 10 years of their retirement, firefighters. And come on, people, you live this long, great career. You have this long, great career, and then you get to retirement and you're dying. I'm pretty sure you want to be able to enjoy it with your spouse for a little while. So there are things you can do. Please do them. Please do not bury your head in the sand, and help the next generation. It's just incumbent upon you. You owe that to those firefighters that are coming up, to teach them and to be the model and to, you know, let them look up to you, but you've got to model the appropriate behavior. And, you know, I don't want to read any more stories. I'm tired of reading stories of firefighters that are dying from cancer.
It is. Everyone is like a needle in the heart, you know, every time, because we are a family. You know, I was telling my wife the other day, we were going to visit, pay condolence call to my sister-in-law, and at the gate of where they live, I had to show you ID, and my ID is in my badge wallet, and I've still carried my badge for my life because that's who I am. I am a firefighter. I define myself that way. And she goes, why do you still carry your badge? You've been out for 30, almost 40 years. I said, because it's who I am, honey. I said, you're going to tell me not to stop at emergencies anymore? Because I've always carried a BLS in my car, full BLS bag in my car since I left the fire service. She goes, no, you got to help somebody. I said, well, that when EMS shows up or fire rescue shows up, and I have to give them the bullet to let them know what's going on with the victims and stuff like that, I show them my ID with the badge so they know that, yes, I was a trained firefighter who knew what to do and started, in initial first care until they got there. And I said, but on the other hand, it's also it's a status of who we are. I've gone to firehouses across this country and knocked on the door and showed them my badge, and boom, I'm in. Do you want to have dinner? Do you want to have breakfast with us? Yeah. That included FDNY. When I was in New York one year for a conference, and the second day had nothing to do with what I was there to learn about. And so I just walked around, found a firehouse, knocked on the door, showed them my badge. And they said, come on in. And it was, that's because we are a family. So you have to understand that families take care of each other.
Yes.
We can't use the word, matter of fact, I just had an article published this morning on the Firehouse Tribune. Do we mean the words we say, or do we just say them? And it's all about family. Do we treat each other really as family all the time? Yeah, you can have disagreements. Families have disagreements. I had fights with my big brother, my younger brother. But, you know, we were still family. At the bottom line is we're family. And if we're family, don't say you're so sad to have to go to a funeral of a firefighter who died of cancer when you're not taking care of yourself.
Absolutely. And
You know?
and that was, I have to say, Josh Carney's friends that were in the fire service, I think that was kind of what pushed Christine and Lillian to, at least Christine, to initially make the donation. It was one of Josh's fellow firefighters at the funeral that said, oh, well, we've been using these responder wipes now. And that was what got Christine to find our website and end up doing the fundraising. And Lillian to continue to push people. And she one of the things that she's done, so October 19th is the anniversary of Josh's passing. And 2 years ago, she had some extra wipes in her car, and, you know, she'll still pop into firehouses and, you know, where Josh either worked or people she knew. So she stopped in right before Josh's, the anniversary of his passing a couple of years ago, had some wipes and, you know, just gave them to him. She was just like, you know, Josh would want you guys to use these. And they were so excited to get them. Lillian ended up kind of taking that and moving forward. And she decided that October 19th would not be a day of sadness of losing Josh, but it would be a day to remember him and know that Josh would want his brothers and sisters taking care of themselves. So that's now what we call Decon Day. And we kind of do a flash mob across the United States where we get firefighter wives, fire supporters, people to volunteer to go make a donation either to their spouse or to their local department. And it's really been kind of fun. And I think it's given Lillian a way to take what could be a really difficult day and turn it around into something positive, because, you know, she's adamant that that's what Josh would want. And he will continue in that way to be there for his brothers and sisters.
And you know what? That means that his spirit is here to teach us.
Absolutely.
That's what it is. You know,
absolutely.
And there are so many departments across this country, again, career, part pay, volunteer, who have lost or know of firefighters nearby who have been lost to cancer. You can't just say, oh man, that's a shame. He was such a great guy. Oh, she was a great firefighter. I mean, she made captain in short. Don't just mourn the loss. Do something to, in their remembrance, in their honor, to say, hey, we're not going to let this, we're going to try to prevent this from happening in our department. We're going to work hard to honor their memory and what they stood for. Because especially if that passing is attributed to a line of duty a death from cancer, occupational cancer. And if that's the case,
it's just like any other line of duty death. If there's an LODD, NIOSH is going to come in and figure out what happened, what went wrong. And 9 times out of 10, there's going to be recommendations that come out of that,
right,
how to prevent that in the future. So why is that not occurring with line of duty deaths that are attributable to cancer? We know what needs to be done to prevent it. Now do it.
Exactly. And that's what this is all about. Folks, I want to remind you again, if you would like to help the Carney Strong Initiative, you can find them at carneystrong.org. You can find us if you want to help us in our foundation to help our brothers and sisters. And, you know, so far, I guess we haven't been approached or been notified of a family who's lost one of our brothers or sisters due to cancer. But we're going to start looking at that as well to help out for our foundation. I think it's very important because go ahead.
Steve, I was just going to say, if people want to go to carneystrong.org, there is a grant application on there if there's a department that's looking for decontamination supplies, or if you would like to sponsor a department or make a donation to carneystrong.org, you can do all of that on the website.
Yeah, that's great. And we have the same thing, if you go to our website, the numeral 5, I have to be very careful about this. The numeral 5, the number 5 dash alarmtaskforcecorp.org, you'll see the picture of the Q siren on a bunch of pages. All those pictures are connected to our donation. Donation window will pop up. You can choose to donate to the foundation account, or you can donate to the main account, which helps us with our operations. But to tell you the truth, I'd rather you donate it to the foundation so that we can reach out and help more of our brothers and sisters and or their families in dire need. Tonya, I can't thank you enough. This has been a great session, great information. You and I are on the same wavelength. We talk with the same people. Just as Josh woke up his department with his diagnosis and passing, unfortunately, Paul Cotter has been the shining example for the Worcester Fire Department. And
Yeah.
I know because I grew up in the city just next to Worcester and Framingham, Mass. And so that kind of bonded us when I got to meet them online. And he, same thing, because thankfully, and thank God Paul's doing well now. But the fact is, what happened. And Diane jumped on top of this, has gotten the message out. And because of that, the Worcester Fire Department has taken prevention more seriously, and other departments in Massachusetts. The Boston Fire Department, if you have not seen the video, folks, about the Boston Fire Department's cancer video, go to YouTube, please. And if you don't watch my show, that's fine, but you got to watch the video from Boston Fire Department, their cancer resolution video. It will tear your heart out. It will make you cry, but you'll smile at the end.
Absolutely.
Because of what they did, what they've done there. And there are other, it's not just Boston. We have a lot, and we have to say this because we'd be remiss. There are a lot of departments out there who are working hard to mitigate toxin and cancer in the fires, in their departments, protecting their firefighters, changing the way, as you said, changing the way stations are designed. I have a cousin who's an architect, and he's in Cincinnati now, but he worked on several fire stations at other firms that he was at. And, single, instead of bunk rooms, we're going to single rooms. Can't cross this line. And you can't cross a red line if you haven't deconned yourself as well. I mean, is it a pain in the ass? Yeah. Okay. But you know what? For making you take a shower, what's it going to cost you? 4 minutes, 5 minutes for a decent shower with the right wash to get the stuff off you, and then you're back in your station gear or in your civvy gear, and you can go do what you want to do. But those 4 or 5 minutes just might save you, one of your colleagues, or somebody in your family from a possible contamination.
Absolutely.
So it goes back to the same final words. If you don't take care of yourself, how the hell are you going to be able to take care of anybody else?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you, Steve, so much for spreading your message. I really appreciate the platform, and it is so obvious that you and I both share a passion for this. So thank you very much for the opportunity.
Well, it's our pleasure. And I want to add, folks, that we've scheduled, we have a new webinar coming up on Thursday, December 9th at 6:30 p.m. It's called Situational Awareness, Responding to Emergencies on Active Roadways. We've covered this topic. It's a very important topic to us. We have lost this year alone over 30 first responders to accidents on active roadways. Over 30, and here we are just starting November. That's 30 way too many. And so we have great speakers, including Dr. and former Chief Rich Gassaway from Situational Awareness Matters podcast. We have Deputy Chief Ron Tennant from Grand Rapids, Michigan Fire Department, who's been working with blockers and attenuators on the back of blockers for over a decade. And we have Jack Sullivan, the Director of Training, and Todd Lease, the Assistant Director of Training at ResponderSafety.com. So we have a great podcast. And once again, Tonya, out of her generosity, is donating one of the gifts that we're giving away in the drawing at the end of the podcast. We'll be giving away a box of responder wipes and body wash to the winner drawn, and a case to their station. Okay, so they were kind enough to do that with our last webinar on PFAS, and it so happened to go to a great station in Boston, Station 21. Okay, so Ed Kelly, the new general president, that's where he's a firefighter, but it wasn't because of that. It was because the name was drawn out and somebody wished it over to them, which was very kind of them. And also our good friends at LifeScan Wellness and our good friend Todd LeDuc over there, they're providing another gift certificate for a complete LifeScan exam, physical exam. It's about a 3-hour exam with the labs, and they're giving a gift certificate for that as well. And of course, we're going to throw in some t-shirts from 5 Alarm Task Force. So that'll be on the 9th. And again, this is all to help keep you safe. Why? Because I'm a former firefighter. The members of our board are firefighters. We care about each other. We are a family. We are truly a family, and we have to take care of each other first, just like you do with your personal family at home. We take care of each other, and that's what this podcast is about. This is what our shows are about, is to educate, teach, entertain, whatever, just so you get the message of what's happening today in the fire service, and that's what's most important. So Tonya, our sincere thanks. Really appreciate your time today and the message, both from Respond to Wipes and for the Carney Strong Initiative. Folks, please visit the website, carneystrong.org, and take a look at Respond to Wipes' website also. You might learn some more there that we weren't able to put into the podcast. We will be back next week with Commissioner Jared Renshaw as we talk about what does a chief or commissioner do when City Hall calls? And you'll learn about that next week with Commissioner Renshaw when he joins us. So thank you. If you're watching the video, this will conclude the video. If you're listening to the audio, we're going to be right back right after a few messages. But thank you all for tuning in. We appreciate it. Stay safe and stay well, and we'll see you very soon. Take care.